Welcome to Poirot Stories, where Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot brings captivating mysteries to life.
In the shadowed halls of Blackthorn Hall, a scream pierces the night, and a man lies dead, stabbed in a locked study, clutching a cryptic note about a hidden will. Was it greed, betrayal, or a long-buried secret that drove someone to murder? Hercule Poirot, the brilliant Belgian detective, steps into a web of lies where every guest hides a motive and every clue points to a shocking truth. Who among the elegant Lady Evelyn, the nervous Dr. Cresswell, the fiery Colonel Vance, or the secretive Thorntons wields the deadly hand? As the moor whispers its secrets, only Poirot's little grey cells can unravel the mystery before another life is lost. Will the truth set Blackthorn Hall free, or destroy it forever? Chapter 1. The Invitation to Blackthorn Hall. The autumn mist hung low over the Devon countryside, cloaking the rolling hills in a shroud of silver. Blackthorn Hall, a sprawling Jacobean manor, stood at the edge of the moor, its gabled roofs and mullioned windows cutting a somber silhouette against the twilight. The house, with its ivy-clad walls and ancient oaks guarding the drive, seemed to whisper secrets to those who approached. On this particular evening, September 4th, 1925, the air was thick with anticipation, though none of the guests arriving at the hall could yet name the unease that prickled their nerves. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the loyal friend and chronicler of Hercule Poirot's exploits, sat in the back of a hired motor car, watching the countryside slip by. His invitation to Blackthorn Hall had come unexpectedly, penned in the elegant hand of Lady Evelyn Marwood, widow of the late Sir Reginald Marwood, a textile magnate whose fortune had built the estate. The note had been brief but insistent. A weekend gathering to settle a matter of family importance, with a request for Hastings to bring his esteemed friend, Monsieur Poirot. Hastings, flattered by the summons and sensing the promise of intrigue, had persuaded Poirot to join him, though the little Belgian detective had grumbled about leaving the comforts of his London flat. It is not.
Hair streaked with silver, her posture regal, despite the faint lines of strain around her eyes. Her gown, a deep emerald silk, spoke of wealth, but her smile was tight, as if stretched over some unspoken worry. "Captain Hastings, how kind of you to come," she said, her voice smooth but measured. "And Monsieur Poirot, your reputation precedes you. I trust the journey was not too taxing." Poirot inclined his head, his mustache twitching slightly. "Madame, for the sake of a friend, I endure even the English trains, but I confess, I am intrigued. Your invitation, it speaks of a matter most delicate, no?" Lady Evelyn's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. "All in good time, Monsieur Poirot. For now, please, make yourselves at home. Dinner will be served at 8. The great hall buzzed with a murmur of guests. Hastings scanned the room, cataloguing the company. There was Dr. Lionel Cresswell, a wiry man with spectacles and a nervous habit of tapping his fingers, who had been Sir Reginald's physician and now served as Lady Evelyn's confidant. Beside him stood Miss Clara Marwood, Lady Evelyn's niece, a pale young woman of 22, with sharp eyes and a habit of glancing over her shoulder. Colonel Rupert Vance, a retired military man with a booming voice and a limp, was regaling a bored-looking couple with tales of his campaigns in India. The couple, Mr. and Mrs. Gerald Thornton, were newcomers to the Marwood circle. Gerald, a solicitor with a penchant for brandy, and his wife, Beatrice, whose diamond necklace seemed to weigh heavily on her delicate frame. Most intriguing, however, was Victor Marwood, Lady Evelyn's stepson from Sir Reginald's first marriage. A man in his late 30s, Victor had the lean, hungry look of someone who felt the world owed him more than it had given. His dark eyes darted about the room, lingering on Clara with an intensity that made Hastings uneasy. As the guests mingled, Hastings caught fragments of conversation, talk of Sir Reginald's will, whispers of a disputed inheritance, and vague allusions to a family matter that required resolution. The air was thick with unspoken rivalries, and Hastings, ever the observer, noted how each guest— And she rose, her face drained of color. "Excuse me," she murmured, and hurried out, followed by Dr. Cresswell. The guests exchanged glances, their murmurs growing louder. Poirot, seated beside Hastings, leaned close and whispered, "Mon ami, observe the faces. Something has happened, and it is not, I think, a trifling matter." Moments later, Lady Evelyn returned, her composure fraying. "My friends," she said, her voice trembling, "I regret to inform you that there has been an incident. My stepson Victor is needed upstairs at once." Victor, already flushed with wine, pushed back his chair with a scowl. "What's this about, Evelyn? Another of your theatrics?" "Please, Victor," she said sharply. "It is urgent." He followed her out, and the room fell silent, save for the ticking of the clock. Hastings glanced at Poirot, whose eyes were fixed on the empty doorway, his fingers steepled in thought. "Something is amiss, Hastings," Poirot said softly. "The little grey cells, they are already at work." As the guests resumed their meal, their forced cheer only deepened the sense of foreboding. Blackthorn Hall, with its ancient walls and shadowed corners, seemed to close in around them, as if guarding a secret it was not yet ready to reveal. Chapter 2. The Shadow in the Study. The dining room at Blackthorn Hall, so recently filled with the clink of crystal and the murmur of strained pleasantries, now lay under a pall of silence. The guests, left to their own devices after Lady Evelyn's abrupt departure with Victor Marwood, exchanged uneasy glances. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked relentlessly, its pendulum slicing through the tension like a metronome. Captain Hastings, seated beside Hercule Poirot, felt a prickle of apprehension. The little Belgian detective, however, remained composed, his sharp eyes darting from face to face as he sipped his claret with deliberate calm. "Mon ami," Poirot murmured, leaning toward Hastings, "observe the behavior. The sudden absence of our hostess and her stepson, it is not a mere domestic squabble. No, there is there is something more sinister." Before Hastings could reply, a piercing scream shattered to the late Sir Reginald Marwood's study, a room Lady Evelyn had kept locked since his death 2 years prior. The door now stood ajar, and inside, illuminated by the flickering light of a single lamp, was a scene that chilled even Hastings' seasoned nerves. Victor Marwood lay sprawled across the Persian rug, his face contorted in a grimace of pain or surprise. A letter opener, its silver handle glinting malevolently, protruded from his chest, and a dark stain spread across his white shirt front. Lady Evelyn stood frozen near the desk, her hands clasped to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Dr. Cresswell knelt beside Victor, his fingers searching for a pulse, though his grim expression suggested the effort was futile. "He's dead," Cresswell announced, his voice barely above a whisper. "Stabbed, I'd wager. Not 10 minutes ago." A gasp rippled through the onlookers. Clara Marwood, who had pushed her way to the front, let out a choked sob and swayed as if she might faint. Mrs. Thornton, clinging to her husband's arm, muttered something about bad blood in the family. Colonel Vance, ever the man of action, barked at the butler to fetch the police, though the nearest station was miles away across the moor. Poirot stepped forward, his small frame commanding attention despite the chaos. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade, "I beg of you, do not touch anything. This is now a matter for the law, and for Hercule Poirot." He knelt beside the body, his movements precise, almost reverent. His eyes scanned Victor's lifeless form, lingering on the letter opener, the angle of the wound, and the position of the arms. He noted a crumpled piece of paper clutched in Victor's right hand, but he did not touch it. Instead, he rose and turned to Lady Evelyn, who had sunk into a chair, her face ashen. "Madame," Poirot said gently, "I must ask you to recount precisely what happened. You left the dining room with Monsieur Victor. What followed?" Lady Evelyn's hands trembled as she spoke. "It was a private matter. Victor had been drinking, and I wished to speak with him about family business."
A flame. "I must insist that everyone return to the drawing room. The police will arrive, but until then, we must preserve the scene. Hastings, mon ami, assist me, s'il vous plaît." As the guests retreated, their whispers buzzing like flies, Hastings followed Poirot's lead. The detective circled the study, his eyes taking in every detail. The heavy oak desk, cluttered with papers and an inkstand. The open window, through which a damp breeze stirred the curtains. The faint scuff mark on the polished floor near the body. He paused by the desk, noting a half-empty glass of brandy and a small brass key, presumably the one Lady Evelyn had used to unlock the door. "Hastings," Poirot said softly, "what do you make of this room?" "It is, I think, a stage set for tragedy. But the actors, they are not all what they seem." Hastings frowned, his mind racing. "It's a locked room, Poirot. The door was locked when Lady Evelyn left, and she had the key. How could anyone have entered?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Précisément, mon ami. The locked room is always a challenge, but it is never impregnable. The key, the window, the timing, these are the threads we must unravel. And this paper in Victor's hand, it may hold a secret worth killing for." As the distant wail of a police siren broke the silence of the moor, Hastings felt a shiver run through him. Blackthorn Hall, with its ancient walls and hidden truths, had claimed its first victim. But Poirot, with his little grey cells already at work, was determined to ensure it would not claim another. Chapter 3. The Arrival of Hercule Poirot. The study at Blackthorn Hall, now a grim tableau of death, was bathed in the harsh glow of electric lights as the local police arrived. Inspector Grayson, a burly man with a weathered face and a no-nonsense demeanour, took charge with the efficiency of one accustomed to rural disputes rather than cold-blooded murder. His constables cordoned off the room, their heavy boots thudding against the polished floor, while the guests were herded back to the drawing room under the watchful eye of a young sergeant. The air was the room once more, his eyes darting from the letter opener in Victor's chest to the crumpled papers still clutched in his hand, which the police had yet to examine closely. "Hastings," Poirot said softly, beckoning his friend closer, "you will note the position of the body. The arms, they are flung outward, as if in surprise. The letter opener, it is driven deep, with force. This was no accident, no moment of passion. It was deliberate." Calculated, Hastings nodded, though his stomach churned at the sight. "But who could have done it, Poirot? Lady Evelyn said the door was locked when she left, and she had the key. The window was open, but it's a sheer drop to the ground below. Surely no one could have climbed in and out so quickly." Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign that his mind was already weaving a tapestry of possibilities. The locked door, the open window, these are but pieces of the puzzle, mon ami. We must also consider the timing. Lady Evelyn left Victor alone for what, 5 minutes? 10? Enough time for a determined soul to act, but not without risk. And this paper, he gestured toward Victor's hand, it is, I think, the key to our mystery. Inspector Grayson, overhearing, approached with a scowl. "If you've something to say, Mr. Poirot, out with it.
I've a murder to solve, and I don't need amateur theatrics." Poirot's eyes twinkled with suppressed amusement. "Amateur, Inspector? Non, non. I am Hercule Poirot, and I assure you my methods are most professional. With your permission, may I examine the paper in the victim's hand? It may tell us much." Grayson hesitated, then nodded curtly. A constable carefully extracted the crumpled sheet, revealing a single page torn from a notebook, its edges stained with blood. Poirot, donning a pair of gloves provided by the police, smoothed it out on the desk. The writing was hurried, scrawled in black ink. "The truth about the will must not come out. Meet me at 9:30. Below the words was a smudged initial, possibly a C or a G. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, his fingers tracing the air above the paper.
A handkerchief. Colonel Vance puffed on a cigar, his bluster subdued, while the Thorntons whispered to each other, their expressions guarded. Dr. Cresswell, ever the nervous observer, adjusted his spectacles repeatedly. Poirot took center stage, his small stature belied by the authority in his voice. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "a tragedy has occurred. Victor Marwood is dead, murdered, in a room locked from the inside. I ask you now to account for your movements between 9:15 and 9:30 this evening, when the scream was heard. Speak truthfully, for the truth, it always reveals itself." Lady Evelyn spoke first, her voice steady but strained. "As I said, I left Victor in the study at approximately 9:20 to fetch Dr. Cresswell. We returned together and found him as he was." Dr. Cresswell nodded. "I was in the corridor near the library when Lady Evelyn called me. I'd stepped out of the dining room to clear my head. I reached the study with her at 9:30, perhaps a minute before." Clara's voice trembled as she spoke. "I was in the dining room the whole time. I didn't leave until we heard the scream." Her eyes darted to Colonel Vance, who confirmed her account with a gruff nod. The Thorntons, speaking in turn, claimed they too had remained in the dining room, though Mrs. Thornton admitted to stepping into the adjacent conservatory for a breath of air around 9:25. "I was back before the scream," she insisted, her diamond necklace glinting as she moved. Poirot listened, his head tilted, his eyes narrowing at each response. Hastings, watching closely, knew that look. The little grey cells were at work, sifting through the alibis for the faintest crack. When the interviews concluded, Poirot thanked the guests with exaggerated courtesy and drew Hastings aside. "Mon ami," he whispered, "there is a discrepancy, a small one, but it is there. The times, they do not align perfectly. And this note, it points to a motive rooted in the past." Element, his neat figure moving with purpose as he prepared to unravel the threads of the mystery. Captain Hastings stood by the fireplace, watching as Poirot arranged a small notebook and pencil on a side table, with the precision of a surgeon laying out instruments. The detective's moustache was immaculate, his eyes bright with the thrill of the chase. "Mon ami," Poirot said, catching Hastings's gaze, "today we begin in earnest. The alibis, they are like a tapestry, beautiful but with flaws hidden in the weave. We shall find them." Inspector Grayson, less enthused by Poirot's theatrics, had agreed to let the detective conduct interviews alongside his own, provided they were systematic and recorded. The guests, summoned one by one, filed into the drawing room with varying degrees of reluctance. Poirot's method was deceptively simple. He asked each person to recount their movements,
their relationships with Victor, and their knowledge of Sir Reginald's will, all while observing their gestures, their hesitations, their eyes. First came Lady Evelyn Marwood, her composure a fragile mask. She sat opposite Poirot, her emerald gown exchanged for sombre black, as if mourning had already settled upon her. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, her voice steady but low, "I have told you all I know. Victor and I argued about the estate. He believed he was entitled to more than his father's will provided. I left him in the study to fetch Dr. Cresswell, and when we returned, he was dead." Poirot's fingers steepled beneath his chin. "This will, madame, it is much discussed, no? Tell me, what did Victor stand to gain or lose by its terms?" Lady Evelyn's lips tightened. "My late husband, Sir Reginald, left the bulk of his fortune to me, with provisions for Clara and a modest trust for Victor. Victor felt slighted. He had debts, you see, and he believed the estate should have been his outright." "And this argument," Poirot pressed, "it was heated?" She hesitated, her eyes flickering to the window. "Victor was passionate. But I assure you, I had no wish to harm him. Victor was difficult. He resented my role as Lady Evelyn's confidant. He once accused me of influencing Sir Reginald's will, which is absurd. I was merely the family physician. Next came Clara Marwood, her pale face framed by a simple grey dress. Her eyes, red-rimmed from the previous night's tears, held a spark of defiance. "I barely spoke to Victor," she said, her voice soft but firm. "He was my step-cousin, but we weren't close. He was always angry, always demanding more from Aunt Evelyn. I stayed in the dining room until the scream." Poirot tilted his head. "Mademoiselle, you seem uneasy. Is there something you wish to share? A secret, perhaps, about Victor or the will?" Clara's fingers twisted her handkerchief. "No, nothing. I hated how he treated Aunt Evelyn. That's all." Colonel Rupert Vance followed, his booming voice subdued but his posture rigid. "I was in the dining room, smoking a cigar," he said gruffly. "Heard nothing, saw nothing, until that scream. Victor was a bounder, if you ask me, always sniffing around for money. But I've no reason to kill him." The Thorntons, interviewed together, presented a united front. Gerald Thornton, his brandy-scented breath barely masked, claimed they had remained in the dining room, though Beatrice admitted again to her brief visit to the conservatory. "I needed air," she said, her diamond necklace catching the light. "I was back before anything happened." Poirot's questions were gentle but relentless, probing for inconsistencies. He noted the precise times each guest claimed: 9:15 for Lady Evelyn's departure from the dining room, 9:20 for her call to Cresswell, 9:25 for Beatrice's stroll to the conservatory. The scream, all agreed, came at 9:30, yet something nagged at Hastings, a sense that the timelines overlapped too neatly, as if rehearsed. When the interviews concluded, Poirot drew Hastings aside, his expression thoughtful. "Mon ami, did you observe? Each alibi is precise, yet not one of them feels entirely natural. And this will, always it returns to the will. There is a secret here, Hastings, one that Victor Marwood took to his grave." Hastings, however, was being analyzed for handwriting, though its smudged initial offered little clarity. Poirot, undeterred, paced the drawing-room, his mind a whirl of connections. "We must dig deeper, Hastings," he said. "The motives, they are hidden in the hearts of these people. Greed, fear, perhaps even love. But the truth, it will not hide forever." Outside, the moor stretched endlessly, its mists curling like spectres around Blackthorn Hall. Inside, the guests avoided each other's eyes, each nursing their own secrets. And Poirot, with his little grey cells, was already beginning to see the shape of a truth that would shake the house to its foundations. Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. The morning mist had burned away, leaving Blackthorn Hall bathed in the pale sunlight of September 5th, 1925. The moor beyond stretched bleak and endless, its silence a stark contrast to the restless tension within the manor's walls. In the drawing-room, the guests of Lady Evelyn Marwood sat in uneasy clusters, their conversations hushed and strained. The murder of Victor Marwood had transformed the weekend gathering into a grim inquisition, and the presence of Inspector Grayson's constables, trudging through the house with notebooks and measuring tapes, did little to ease the atmosphere. Hercule Poirot, however, was undeterred by the gloom. He stood by the tall windows, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes scanning the room with the precision of a hawk. Captain Hastings, ever at his side, noted the detective's quiet intensity. "Poirot," he whispered, "you've been awfully quiet since the interviews. Have you spotted something?" Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile playing beneath it. "Mon ami, I have spotted many things, but the truth, it is like a fine wine, it must be savoured slowly. For now, we are surrounded by red herrings, and it is our task to swim past them." The morning's interviews had yielded a web of alibis, each guest claiming innocence with varying degrees of conviction. Yet Inspector Grayson, a man of blunt instincts, had all compelling theory, Inspector, Poirot said. But I wonder, does it account for the locked door, or the note in Victor's hand? Grayson snorted. The door's a distraction. Maybe Victor unlocked it himself, or someone slipped in through the window. As for the note, could be Victor wrote it himself, planning to confront someone. Poirot's eyes gleamed with suppressed amusement. Perhaps. But let us test this theory, no? I should like to speak with Colonel Vance again. Vance was summoned, his face flushed with indignation as he limped into the drawing-room. "This is preposterous," he barked, his moustache bristling. "I'm no murderer, Poirot." "Yes, I argued with Victor yesterday. He owed me a tidy sum from a bad investment he roped me into, but I didn't kill him." Poirot's voice was calm, almost soothing. "Monsieur le Colonel, tell me of this argument. Where did it take place, and what was said?" Vance shifted uncomfortably. "Near the stables, around 4 o'clock. Victor was drunk as usual, and I demanded he repay me. He laughed it off, said he'd get his share of the estate soon enough. I told him he was a fool to think Lady Evelyn would hand over a penny more than the will allowed." "And after this?" Poirot pressed. "I went for a walk on the moor to cool off," Vance said. "Didn't see him again until dinner." Poirot jotted a note, his expression unreadable. "And between 9:15 and 9:30, you were in the dining room, alone with your cigar?" "Yes," Vance snapped. "Clara and the Thorntons were there, but they were chatting among themselves. I didn't leave until that scream." As Vance stormed out, Poirot turned to Hastings. "The Colonel, he is a convenient suspect, no? His temper, his motive, it is all too obvious, and yet the obvious is often the incorrect." Hastings frowned. "You think Grayson's wrong? Vance does seem the type to act in a fit of rage." Poirot shook his head. "Rage, yes, but precision? The letter opener, wiped clean of prints, the locked door, the note. These suggest a mind more calculating than our blustering colonel. No, Hastings, we must look elsewhere." Though her gaze flickered to her husband, who stood in the doorway, watching. Poirot thanked her and dismissed her, but his expression told Hastings he was not satisfied. "The conservatory. It is near the study's window," he murmured. "A brief absence, a dark night. Opportunities, Hastings. Opportunities. As the day wore on, whispers spread among the guests. Clara Marwood, overheard in the corridor, confided to Dr. Cresswell that she feared Victor's death was tied to something in the will. Cresswell, in turn, seemed agitated, his nervous tics more pronounced. Lady Evelyn, meanwhile, remained sequestered in her rooms, claiming a headache, though Hastings suspected she was avoiding further questions. By afternoon, Inspector Grayson had doubled down on Vance, ordering a search of his room for evidence. The search yielded a crumpled receipt for a loan to Victor, dated months earlier, which Grayson trumpeted as proof of motive. Yet Poirot, observing from the sidelines, remained unconvinced. "Hastings," he said as they walked the grounds, the moor stretching bleakly before them. "The red herrings, they multiply. The Colonel's debt, Madame Thornton's stroll, the whispers of the will, these are distractions. But the truth, it lies in the details we have yet to uncover. The note, the scuff mark, the brandy glass, these are not distractions. They are the path." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting Blackthorn Hall in shadow, Hastings felt the weight of the mystery pressing down. Poirot, however, seemed invigorated, his little gray cells humming with purpose. The red herrings might fool the police, but Hercule Poirot was not so easily swayed. Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lawns of Blackthorn Hall, its feeble warmth doing little to dispel the chill that had settled over the estate. By September 5th, 1925, the murder of Victor Marwood had transformed the manor into a crucible of suspicion, with each guest eyeing the others as if searching for the mark of a killer. Inspector Grayson, doggedly pursuing Colonel Vance as
We seek the subtle. Observe, if you please, this scuff mark on the floor. He pointed to a faint crescent-shaped mark near the base of the desk, barely visible against the polished wood. Hastings crouched, squinting. "It's just a scratch, Poirot. Could be from a chair or a clumsy foot." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Non, mon ami. A chair does not move with such precision, nor does a clumsy foot leave so delicate a trace. This mark, it is fresh, made within hours of the murder, and it is curved, as if something heavy was dragged or pivoted." Hastings frowned, trying to follow Poirot's logic. "Something dragged? But what, the body?" Poirot shook his head. "Not the body. Victor was found in the center of the rug, untouched by furniture. No, this mark suggests something else, a movement perhaps, to conceal or reveal." He knelt, his gloved fingers hovering over the mark, then turned his attention to the desk itself. His eyes narrowed as he examined the inkstand, its lid slightly askew. "Hastings, observe the inkstand. It is not centered as one would expect in a room so meticulously kept. And here—" He lifted the lid, revealing a shallow compartment beneath, empty save for a single drop of dried ink. "This inkstand. It has been moved recently. Why?" Hastings, ever the practical man, ventured a guess. "Perhaps Victor knocked it over in a struggle." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Possible, but unlikely. The desk is orderly, save for this one detail. And the inkstand, it is heavy, bronze, not easily toppled. No, someone touched it deliberately, perhaps to hide something. Or to find it." The detective's attention shifted to the open window, its curtains swaying gently in the breeze. He stepped closer, inspecting the sill. And here, another clue. The window was open when we arrived, no? Yet Lady Evelyn did not mention opening it. The night was cool, the moor damp. Why would Victor, or anyone, leave it ajar? Hastings peered out, noting the sheer drop to the garden below. Could someone have climbed in? "It's a long way down, but a ladder." "No!"
Poirot respond. A soft knock interrupted them. Clara Marwood stood in the doorway, her face pale but composed. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I need to speak with you. Alone." Poirot gestured for her to enter, dismissing Hastings with a nod. "Wait for me in the drawing room, mon ami. Mademoiselle has something to share, I think." Reluctantly, Hastings retreated, but not before catching the fear in Clara's eyes. Alone with Poirot, she clasped her hands tightly. "I didn't tell the truth yesterday," she admitted. "Not entirely. I saw something before the scream. Something I didn't mention." Poirot's gaze was steady, encouraging. "Speak, mademoiselle. The truth. It is always better out than in." Clara swallowed hard. "I left the dining room briefly, just before 9:25. I went to the library to fetch a shawl. It was chilly. As I passed the study door, I heard voices. Victor's and someone else's. A man, I think, but I couldn't make out the words. They sounded angry." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And you did not see this man?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "The door was closed, and I didn't linger. I was back in the dining room before the scream." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "Merci, mademoiselle. This is most helpful. But tell me, why keep this secret until now?" Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I was afraid. Victor was always stirring up trouble, and I didn't want to be involved. But I can't stay silent anymore." As Clara left, Poirot rejoined Hastings in the drawing room, his face thoughtful. "A new thread, Hastings," he said. "A man's voice in the study, just before the murder. This complicates our puzzle, but it also brings clarity. The scuff mark, the inkstand, the window, the brandy glass, and now a second voice. The pieces, they begin to align." Outside, the moor seemed to watch, its silence heavy with secrets. Inside Blackthorn Hall, the guests moved like chess pieces, each unaware of the master strategist observing their every move. Poirot, with his little grey discoveries, the scuff mark, the displaced inkstand, the smudge of earth on the windowsill, and Clara's revelation of a second voice in the study, had set his little grey cells alight. Yet Hastings knew Poirot was waiting for something more, some crack in the carefully constructed facades of the guests. "Poirot," Hastings ventured, "Clara's story about the voices, do you believe her? It could shift suspicion away from Colonel Vance." Poirot paused, his mustache twitching. "Mademoiselle Clara speaks a partial truth, mon ami. But partial truths are often more dangerous than lies. She heard a voice, yes, but why reveal it now? Fear, perhaps, or calculation. We must probe deeper." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Inspector Grayson, his face flushed with the self-assurance of a man who believed he was closing in on his quarry. "Mr. Poirot," he said gruffly, "we've found something in Vance's room, a pocket knife with a blade that could match the depth of Victor's wound. It's not the letter opener, but it's suspicious. I'm bringing him in for questioning." Poirot's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, merely nodding as Grayson strode off to summon the colonel. Hastings, however, was skeptical. "Another knife? Poirot, this feels too convenient. Vance is no fool. He wouldn't keep a murder weapon in his room." "Précisément," Poirot murmured. "The knife. It is another red herring, placed to mislead. But it tells us something else. Someone wishes to ensure the colonel remains under suspicion." Before Poirot could elaborate, a commotion erupted in the corridor. Dr. Lionel Cresswell, his spectacles askew and his face pale, burst into the drawing room, followed closely by a flustered Lady Evelyn. "Monsieur Poirot," Cresswell stammered, his voice high with agitation. I must speak with you. It's urgent." Poirot gestured for him to sit, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Cresswell's agitation. "Speak, doctor. What troubles you?" Cresswell glanced nervously at Lady Evelyn, who nodded, her expression strained. "It's about Victor," he began, his fingers tapping incessantly.
Written by Sir Reginald before his death. Victor claimed it proved the original will left him the entire estate, and that Lady Evelyn had it changed. A gasp escaped Lady Evelyn, her composure cracking. "That's a lie. There was no such letter. Victor was delusional, always chasing fantasies of wealth. I told them as much when we argued in the study." Poirot's fingers steepled, his expression unreadable. "And this argument, madame? It was heated, you said. Did Victor mention this letter then?" Lady Evelyn hesitated, her eyes darting to the floor. He alluded to something, yes, but I thought it was his usual bluster. I left to fetch Dr. Cresswell, because Victor seemed unwell, not because of any letter." Poirot turned to Cresswell. "And you, doctor, did you see this letter?" Cresswell shook his head vigorously. "No, never. Victor was agitated, but he showed me nothing. I thought he was raving." As the two retreated, Hastings leaned close to Poirot. "This letter business, it's explosive, Poirot. If Victor was telling the truth, it gives Lady Evelyn a motive. She could lose everything if the will was contested." Poirot nodded slowly. "Oui, but we must not leap to conclusions. A letter mentioned, but not seen? It is like a ghost, haunting this house. And yet, the note in Victor's hand, it suggests he was close to a truth someone wished to bury." The detective's attention was drawn to the arrival of Gerald Thornton, who had been summoned at Poirot's request. The solicitor, his face flushed from too much brandy, sat heavily, his wife Beatrice hovering nearby. "Monsieur Thornton," Poirot began, "you drafted Sir Reginald's will, no? Tell me, was there ever a previous version, one that favored Victor?" Thornton's eyes widened, then narrowed. "Absolutely not. The will I prepared was Sir Reginald's final wish. Lady Evelyn inherited the estate, with trusts for Clara and Victor. Victor's claims were baseless, a product of his resentment." Beatrice, unprompted, interjected. "Victor was a troublemaker. He cornered Gerald at dinner, demanding to see the will. Bring it into the light." Chapter 8. The Emotional Turning Point. The evening of September 5th, 1925, descended upon Blackthorn Hall with a heavy stillness, the moor outside cloaked in twilight's deepening gloom. The guests, confined to the manor by Inspector Grayson's orders, moved like spectres through the candlelit corridors, their faces etched with exhaustion and dread. The murder of Victor Marwood had cracked the fragile veneer of civility, and the revelations of hidden letters, disputed wills, and overheard arguments had left the household teetering on the edge of collapse. Hercule Poirot, however, remained a beacon of calm, his meticulous mind sifting through the tangle of lies and half-truths with relentless precision. Captain Hastings stood in the drawing-room, nursing a cup of tea that had long gone cold. He watched Poirot, who sat near the fireplace, his small notebook open, his pencil tapping rhythmically as he reviewed his notes. The detective's eyes gleamed with the intensity of a man nearing a breakthrough, though his expression betrayed nothing. "Poirot," Hastings ventured, "this business about the letter, it stirred everyone up. Do you think it's real, or just Victor's drunken fantasy?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile flickering. "Mon ami, whether the letter exists or not, it is real in its effect. It has driven someone to murder, and now it drives others to fear. We are close, Hastings, to the heart of this affair." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft sob from the doorway. Clara Marwood stood there, her grey dress rumpled, her eyes swollen with tears. She clutched a crumpled handkerchief, her composure shattered. "Monsieur Poirot," she said,
her voice breaking. "I can't bear it any longer. I must tell you. I must tell someone." Poirot rose, his movements graceful but deliberate, and gestured for her to sit. "Mademoiselle Clara, you are distressed. Speak and let the truth ease your burden." Hastings, sensing the weight of the moment, quietly closed the drawing-room door to ensure privacy. Clara sank into a chair, her hands trembling. "It's about Victor," she began, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I lied about how much I knew. That night before dinner—"
Listen. And now, her voice broke into a sob, now he's dead, and it's my fault for not stopping him. Poirot's expression softened, though his mind remained alert. "Mademoiselle, you are not to blame for the actions of a murderer. But tell me, did Victor name this someone who knew?" Clara hesitated, her eyes darting to the closed door. "No, but—" He looked toward the dining room when he said it, as if he suspected someone there. "I thought he meant Aunt Evelyn, or perhaps Dr. Cresswell. They were always whispering together." Poirot leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "And why, mademoiselle? Did you not share this sooner?" Clara's hands twisted the handkerchief. "I was afraid. Victor's death, it's torn everything apart. I didn't want to make things worse for Aunt Evelyn or for myself. But I can't keep silent any more. I feel like the walls are closing in." Poirot nodded, his fingers steepled. "Merci, mademoiselle. Your courage. It brings us closer to the truth. Go now, and rest. But say nothing of this to the others. Not yet." As Clara left, her steps unsteady, Hastings turned to Poirot, his brow furrowed. "Good Lord, Poirot, this changes everything. If Victor had proof of a forged will, it gives half the house a motive. Lady Evelyn, Cresswell, even Thornton, who drafted the thing." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Oui, but it also raises questions. If this letter exists, where is it? The study was searched, yet nothing was found. And if it does not exist, why did Victor die clutching a note about the will? The truth, Hastings, lies in the gap between what is said and what is hidden." The detective's words were cut short by the arrival of Inspector Grayson, his face grim. "Mr. Poirot, we've had a development. One of the maids found a scrap of paper in the conservatory, near where Mrs. Thornton claimed she went for air. It's burned, but there's enough left to read, 'Must be stopped. Will. Looks like it was torn from a larger sheet." Poirot's interest sharpened. "And where is this scrap now?" Grayson produced a small evidence bag, dancing on the walls of Blackthorn Hall. Outside, the moor lay silent, its secrets buried in the gathering dark. Inside, the truth was beginning to stir, roused by the relentless logic of Hercule Poirot and the raw emotion of a young woman's confession. Chapter 9. The Trap. The evening of September 5th, 1925, cloaked Blackthorn Hall in a shroud of unease, the moor outside whispering secrets through the wind that rattled the windows. The murder of Victor Marwood had transformed the manor into a stage where every guest played a part, their masks of civility slipping under the weight of suspicion. Hercule Poirot, with his unerring instinct for truth, sensed the moment had come to tighten the net. The revelations of Clara's confession and the charred scrap of paper found in the conservatory had shifted the dynamics of the house, and Poirot was ready to exploit the tension. Captain Hastings stood in the drawing-room, watching as Poirot arranged the chairs in a precise semicircle, each one facing a small table where he placed his notebook and a single candle. The detective's movements were deliberate, almost theatrical, as if he were setting a stage for a performance. "Poirot," Hastings said, his voice low, "you're planning something, aren't you? This setup, it's like you're about to spring a trap." Poirot's eyes twinkled with a mixture of mischief and resolve. "Mon ami, you are not wrong. The murderer, they are clever, but they are also human, and humans, when pressed, make mistakes. Tonight, we shall apply a little pressure
and we shall see who cracks. Inspector Grayson, though skeptical of Poirot's methods, had agreed to the detective's request to gather the guests for a discussion after dinner. The inspector, still focused on Colonel Vance, saw the gathering as an opportunity to observe his prime suspect. But Poirot had other plans. As the clock struck 8, the guests filed into the drawing room, their faces a gallery of apprehension. Lady Evelyn, her black dress stark against her pale skin, sat with rigid dignity. Clara Marwood, her eyes still red from tears, clutched her handkerchief. Dr. Cresswell's fingers twitched nervously, while Colonel Vance puffed his cigar with forced nonchalance. The Thorntons, Gerald and Beatrice, sat close together, their expressions guarded, her diamond necklace glinting in the candlelight. Poirot stood before them, his small frame commanding the room. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice clear and measured, "we are gathered to discuss—" Must be stopped. Will the handwriting matches? Someone in this room knows more than they have admitted. Lady Evelyn's hands tightened in her lap. "Monsieur Poirot, I've told you everything. Victor's claims about a forged will were nonsense. There was no letter." Poirot tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. "And yet, madame, Victor believed otherwise. Mademoiselle Clara tells us he spoke of a letter from Sir Reginald, hidden in the study, proving the will was altered. Dr. Cresswell, you too heard Victor's accusations. Why did you not mention this letter sooner?" Cresswell's spectacles glinted as he shifted uncomfortably. "I thought it was a delusion. Victor was drunk, raving. I saw no letter." Poirot's voice grew sharper. "And yet, doctor, you were in the corridor near the study when Lady Evelyn called you. You had opportunity to enter, to act. And you, Madame Thornton," he turned to Beatrice, "your stroll to the conservatory places you near the study's window at the critical moment. The burned paper. Did you destroy it to protect a secret?" Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her necklace. "That's outrageous. I found nothing in the conservatory. I was only there for a moment." Gerald Thornton leaned forward, his face flushed. "See here, Poirot. You can't accuse my wife without evidence. We've cooperated fully." Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. "I accuse no one, yet. But I observe. The scuff mark on the study floor, the displaced inkstand, the smudge of earth on the windowsill, these are not accidents. And the brandy glass, untouched despite Victor's thirst. Why pour a drink and leave it? Someone was in that room. Someone who knew Victor's habits, his secrets." Colonel Vance snorted, his cigar smoke curling upward. "This is all theatrics. If you've got proof, out with it, man. I didn't kill Victor, and I'm tired of being your scapegoat." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Monsieur le Colonel, your temper is noted, but it is not you I watch most closely tonight. No, I watch the one who fears the truth about the will, the one who knows where the letter is hidden, or why it was burned." The room fell silent. The candles flamed, their footsteps echoing in the silent hall. Hastings leaned close. "Poirot, you didn't name a suspect. Were you bluffing?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Not a bluff, mon ami, but a nudge. The murderer. They are shaken now. They will act, and when they do, we shall be watching." Outside, the moor lay dark and silent, its secrets buried in the night. Inside Blackthorn Hall, Poirot's trap had been sprung, and the killer, though still hidden, was beginning to feel the noose of truth tightening. Chapter 10. The Reveal. The night of September 5th, 1925, enveloped Blackthorn Hall in a stillness broken only by the distant howl of the wind across the Devon moor. The drawing room, where Hercule Poirot had set his psychological trap mere hours ago, now stood as the stage for the final act. The guests, summoned once more by the little Belgian detective, filed in with faces drawn tight by dread and anticipation. The air was heavy with the scent of candle wax and the faint tang of fear,
as if the very walls of the manor knew the truth was about to be laid bare. Captain Hastings stood near the fireplace, his heart pounding as he watched Poirot take his place at the center of the room. The detective's small frame was erect, his mustache perfectly groomed, his eyes alight with the quiet triumph of a man who had solved the unsolvable. Inspector Grayson, arms crossed and skeptical, leaned against the doorway, his faith still pinned on Colonel Vance. The guests, Lady Evelyn, Clara, Dr. Cresswell, Colonel Vance, and the Thorntons, sat in their arranged chairs, each avoiding the other's eyes. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice clear and commanding. "Tonight, Hercule Poirot will reveal the truth behind the murder of Victor Marwood. It is a crime of cunning, of secrets, and of a will that drove one among you to kill. Let us reconstruct the events, step by step, and see the puzzle complete." He paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. Victor Marwood was stabbed in a locked study, a letter opener driven into his heart, a note,
Diamond necklace. Madame Thornton, you admitted to stepping into the conservatory at 9:25, near the study window. A burned scrap of paper was found there, with words matching the note in Victor's hand. You claimed you heard nothing, saw nothing, but I say you saw more than you admit. Beatrice gasped, her husband bristling beside her. That's nonsense, Gerald Thornton snapped. My wife had no reason to harm Victor. Poirot raised a hand. Patience, monsieur. Let us consider Dr. Cresswell. The doctor flinched, his spectacles glinting. You were in the corridor near the library when Lady Evelyn called you. You confirmed Victor's rantings about a forged will. But you too had a secret. You were in love with Lady Evelyn, no? A fact Victor knew, and perhaps used to taunt you. Cresswell's face reddened, his hands trembling. That's preposterous. I was merely her physician. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And yet, your devotion was clear. But you did not kill Victor. No, the killer is one who acted with precision, who wiped the letter opener clean, who left the brandy glass untouched to suggest a calm mind. He turned to Clara, whose eyes widened with fear. Mademoiselle Clara, you confessed to hearing a man's voice in the study, arguing with Victor. You thought it was Dr. Cresswell, or perhaps another, but you also knew of Victor's claims about the letter. You feared what he might do to your aunt's inheritance, no? Clara's voice was a whisper. I only wanted to protect Aunt Evelyn. Poirot nodded, then faced the room. The truth, it is this. There was no letter from Sir Reginald. Victor's claims were a fabrication, born of greed and desperation. But someone believed him, or feared others would. The note in his hand was not written by Victor, but to him, luring him to the study at 9:30. The killer entered through the window, stabbed Victor, and exited the same way, locking the door from the inside with a simple trick. A thread pulled through the keyhole to turn the lock after their departure. A gasp rippled through the room. Poirot's gaze settled on Gerald Thornton. Monsieur Thornton, you drafted Gerald? Tell him it's not true. Gerald's shoulders slumped, his bravado crumbling. I had to stop him. He was going to ruin me, ruin us. He said he'd expose the will as a fraud, even if it wasn't. I couldn't let him destroy everything. Inspector Grayson stepped forward, his face grim. Gerald Thornton, you're under arrest. As the constables led Thornton away, the room erupted in murmurs. Poirot turned to Hastings, his expression serene. The little grey cells, mon ami, they never fail. The truth had been revealed, and Blackthorn Hall, though scarred, could begin to heal. But Poirot's work, as always, was not yet done. Chapter 11. The Reflection. The morning of September 6th,
1925, dawned over Blackthorn Hall with a tentative clarity. The moor outside bathed in a soft golden light that seemed to promise renewal. The arrest of Gerald Thornton the previous night had lifted the suffocating veil of suspicion. Yet the manor's ancient walls still seemed to echo with the weight of recent events. The guests, weary from the ordeal, moved quietly through the house, their voices subdued as they prepared to depart. Hercule Poirot, however, remained in the drawing-room, his small figure seated in a high-backed chair, his hands folded neatly over his notebook. The case was solved, but for Poirot, there was always a final moment of reflection. Captain Hastings joined him, his face a mixture of relief and lingering unease. The dramatic reveal of Thornton's guilt had been a triumph of Poirot's logic, yet the human cost of the crime weighed heavily. "Poirot," Hastings said, settling into a chair opposite, "you were brilliant last night. The way you pieced it all together, the window, the scuff mark, the burned note, it was extraordinary. But how did you know it was Thornton and not, say, Lady Evelyn or Cresswell?" Poirot's eyes twinkled, though his expression was tinged with melancholy. "Mon ami, the truth, it is always in the details, but also in the heart. Gerald Thornton was a man of pride, a solicitor whose reputation was his life."
Detective leaned back, his gaze drifting to the window where the moor stretched endlessly under the morning sky. "This case, Hastings, it is not only about murder. It is about greed, fear, and the secrets we keep from those we love. Victor Marwood, he was a man consumed by his own desires, believing he could bend the truth to his will. Gerald Thornton, he killed to protect his name, but in doing so, he lost it. And the others, Lady Evelyn, Clara, Dr. Cresswell, they are left to carry the scars of this truth." Hastings frowned, his practical mind grappling with the philosophical turn. But what about the letter Victor claimed to have? Was it really a fabrication? Poirot nodded. "Oui, I believe so. Victor's greed led him to invent a story of a hidden letter, hoping to extort more from Lady Evelyn. But someone, Thornton, believed him, or feared others would. The note in Victor's hand, it was written by Thornton to lure him to the study, to silence him before he could spread his lies further. The tragedy, it is that Victor's own deception brought about his end." A soft knock interrupted their conversation. Lady Evelyn entered, her black dress a stark contrast to the light flooding the room. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice steady but heavy with gratitude, "I cannot thank you enough. You have saved this house from further ruin. Gerald, I never suspected him. He seemed so devoted to my late husband's wishes." Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, it is my duty to find the truth, however painful. You must now rebuild with those who remain." Lady Evelyn's eyes glistened, but she held her composure. "Clara and I will manage. The estate is secure thanks to you. But I confess, I feel the weight of Victor's death. Perhaps if I had listened to him." Poirot raised a hand gently. "No, madame. The fault lies with the one who chose murder, not with you. Go forward with courage." As Lady Evelyn left, Poirot rose, adjusting his coat with meticulous care. "Come, Hastings," he said, his tone brisk. "The train to London awaits, and I long for the comforts of my flat. This moor, it is too wild."
September 6, 1925, had barely begun to warm the stone walls of Blackthorn Hall, when a new undercurrent of tension rippled through the household. Gerald Thornton's arrest had brought a semblance of closure, but the air remained heavy with unspoken questions. The guests, preparing to depart, moved with the cautious deliberation of those unsure whether the storm had truly passed. Hercule Poirot, however, was not yet ready to leave the stage. His little gray cells, ever restless,
sensed a lingering shadow in the puzzle, a motive yet to be fully illuminated. Captain Hastings found Poirot in the library, a quieter corner of the manor where the scent of old leather and dust hung thick. The detective stood before a bookshelf, his fingers tracing the spine of a volume on estate law, his expression one of deep contemplation. "Poirot," Hastings said, closing the door behind him. "You look troubled. Thornton confessed. Surely the case is closed." Poirot turned, his eyes sharp beneath his furrowed brow. "Mon ami, a confession is not always the end. Gerald Thornton killed Victor Marwood, oui, to protect his reputation. But there is something more, a deeper motive, perhaps, that we have not yet uncovered. The will, the letter, the note, these are pieces, but the picture is incomplete." Hastings frowned, settling into a worn armchair. "Incomplete? You laid it all out last night. The forged will was Victor's lie. Thornton believed it and killed to silence him. What's missing?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his unease. "The why, Hastings. Why did Thornton believe Victor's lie so readily? A solicitor of his experience would know a forged will could be easily disproved. Yet he acted with such desperation. There is another secret, I think, one that ties Thornton to Victor in a way we have not seen." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Clara Marwood, her face pale but resolute. She carried a small, leather-bound journal, its edges worn from frequent handling. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I found this in Victor's room this morning, hidden in a drawer. I think it's important." Poirot took
The key to the unseen motive. Leave it with me, and say nothing to the others. As Clara left, Poirot turned to Hastings. "Mon ami, we have been blind. Thornton was not merely protecting his reputation, he was protecting the secret he shared with Victor. These payments suggest blackmail, or perhaps a scheme. We must speak with Thornton before he is taken to the station." With Inspector Grayson's reluctant permission, Poirot and Hastings visited Thornton in a small parlor where he was held under guard. The solicitor, his face haggard and his hands cuffed, looked up with a mix of defiance and resignation. "What more do you want, Poirot?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "I've confessed. It's over." Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. "Not quite, Monsieur Thornton. This journal of Victor's, it speaks of payments to you, of threats to expose the truth." "What truth, monsieur? What did Victor hold over you?" Thornton's eyes flickered with panic, but he quickly masked it. "Nonsense! Victor owed me money for legal work. That's all." Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but piercing. "No, monsieur. You were not paid for services. You were paid for silence. Victor knew something about you, something that made you fear his talk of a forged will, even if it was a lie. What was it?" Thornton's shoulders slumped, his defiance crumbling. "It was an indiscretion," he muttered. "Years ago, I helped Sir Reginald adjust his accounts to hide certain investments. Victor found out somehow and threatened to expose me unless I paid him. When he started ranting about a forged will, I thought he'd use it to ruin me, to force Lady Evelyn to investigate the estate's finances. I couldn't let that happen." Poirot nodded, his expression grave. "So you lured him to the study with the note, climbed through the window, and silenced him forever. The burned fragment in the conservatory. It was your attempt to destroy the evidence of your meeting." Thornton nodded, his voice barely audible. "I didn't mean for it to come to this, but he left me no choice." As the constables led Thornton's confession. The guests, their bags packed and their farewells stilted, prepared to leave the manor that had become a crucible of secrets.
Yet Hercule Poirot, ever vigilant, sensed that the puzzle was not fully complete. The journal found in Victor Marwood's room had revealed Thornton's motive, a blackmail scheme rooted in hidden financial misdeeds. But Poirot's little grey cells whispered of one final thread yet to be unravelled. Captain Hastings found Poirot in the study, the scene of the crime now stripped of its grim evidence, but still heavy with the echo of violence. The detective stood by the oak desk, his fingers tracing the edge of the inkstand, his eyes fixed on the bookshelf that lined the far wall. "Poirot," Hastings said, his voice tinged with impatience, "Thornton's confessed, the journal explained his motive, and the police are satisfied. Why are we still here? Surely there's nothing left to uncover?" Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile playing beneath it. "Mon ami, you are eager for the comforts of London, no? But Hercule Poirot does not leave a puzzle half-finished. The journal, it tells us of Thornton's secret, oui, but it does not explain the inkstand. Why was it moved? And the bookshelf, there is something here, something we have overlooked." Hastings frowned, glancing at the heavy shelves laden with leather-bound volumes and dusty ledgers. "The bookshelf? It's just books, Poirot. The police searched this room top to bottom." "No," Poirot said, his voice firm. "The police, they search for the obvious. But the truth, it hides in the places no one thinks to look. Help me, Hastings. We must examine these shelves." Together they began pulling books from the shelves, Poirot's movements precise, Hastings more haphazard. The detective's fingers paused on a worn copy of The Complete Angler, its spine slightly misaligned. He tugged it gently, and with a soft click, a narrow panel behind the shelf swung open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a small bundle of letters, tied with a faded ribbon, their edges yellowed with age. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he carefully extracted the bundle. "Thought, we," Poirot said, tying the ribbon back around the letters. Victor's talk of a forged will was a bluff, but these letters were real. Thornton killed to keep them hidden, not just to protect his reputation, but to avoid ruin, perhaps even prison. Their discovery was interrupted by the arrival of Lady Evelyn, her face drawn with exhaustion. She froze at the sight of the letters in Poirot's hands. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice trembling. "What have you found?" Poirot's gaze was gentle but unyielding. "Madame, these are letters from your late husband, detailing financial misdeeds orchestrated with Gerald Thornton. Victor knew of them, or suspected, and used them to blackmail Thornton. This, not the will, was the true motive for murder." Lady Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. "Reginald, I knew he was troubled in his final years, but I never imagined. And Victor, he used this against Thornton." Poirot nodded. "Oui, madame, but you must not carry this burden. The fault lies with those who chose deceit and violence." He handed the letters to Hastings, instructing him to deliver them to Inspector Grayson. "These must go to the police, mon ami. They will strengthen the case against Thornton and ensure justice is complete." As Hastings left to find Grayson, Lady Evelyn sank into a chair, her composure crumbling. "Monsieur Poirot, how can I face this? The estate, Clara's future, it's all tainted now." Poirot placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Madame, the truth, it is painful, but it also cleanses. You and Mademoiselle Clara are strong. You will rebuild." When Hastings returned, confirming the letters were in Grayson's hands, Poirot's expression softened. "The puzzle. It is complete now, Hastings. The letters, the journal, the note. They tell the full story of greed and betrayal. Thornton's crime was not just murder, but the culmination of years of hidden sins. As they prepared to leave the study, the moor outside glowed under the afternoon sun, its wild beauty a stark contrast to the darkness within Blackthorn Hall. Poirot paused at the door, casting a final glance at the room.
"The human heart, mon ami," he said softly. "It is
Meticulous, sensed that a few final threads of the mystery remained to be woven into the tapestry of truth. Captain Hastings stood in the hall, watching, as the last of the guests' luggage was loaded onto waiting motor cars. The atmosphere was one of subdued relief, tempered by the weight of revelations that had shaken the household. Poirot, adjusting his hat with precise care, joined Hastings, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. "Mon ami," he said, "the case is nearly closed, but there is one last matter to address, a question of the heart, not the crime." Hastings raised an eyebrow. "The heart? Poirot, you've solved the murder, found the letters, and exposed Thornton's schemes. What more could there be?" Poirot's moustache twitched with a faint smile. "The human soul, Hastings, it is never so simple as a solved puzzle. There is one among us who carries a burden of guilt, not for murder, but for silence. We must speak with Mademoiselle Clara once more." They found Clara in the conservatory, surrounded by lush ferns and the faint scent of damp earth. She stood by the glass doors, gazing out at the moor, her face pale but composed. The conservatory, where the burned fragment of the note had been found, seemed an apt setting for the final act of Poirot's inquiry. "Mademoiselle Clara," Poirot began, his voice gentle, "you have been brave in sharing Victor's journal, and your confession helped us find the truth. But there is something you have not yet said, no? Something that weighs upon you." Clara's eyes widened, her fingers tightening around the edge of her shawl. "Monsieur Poirot, I've told you everything. About the voices, the journal, Victor's threats. What more could there be?" Poirot's gaze was steady, piercing. "The truth, mademoiselle, is not only in what you saw or heard, but in what you did. The burned note in this very conservatory. It was you who placed it there, was it not?" Hastings gasped, but Clara's reaction was more telling. She froze, her breath catching, before her shoulders slumped in defeat. "How did you know?" she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Poirot's voice remained soft, almost paternal. "The fragment. It was found behind a potted plant, a place too deliberate for a panicked act. You were in the library." His expression one of quiet understanding. "You feared for your aunt, and in your loyalty you acted. But the note, it was Thornton's, luring Victor to his death. Your silence, it delayed the truth, but it did not conceal it." Clara wiped her eyes, her voice steadier now. "I only wanted to protect her. She's lost so much. Uncle Reginald, now Victor. I couldn't bear for her to be suspected." Poirot placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Your heart, it is loyal, mademoiselle. But the truth, it must always come first. You have done right by speaking now." As they left the conservatory, Hastings turned to Poirot, his mind reeling. "Good Lord, Poirot! Clara burning the note? I never would have guessed. But why didn't you suspect Lady Evelyn, given Clara's fear?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Because, mon ami, Lady Evelyn's fear was not that of a murderer, but of a woman guarding her family's honor. The letters proved Thornton's guilt, and Clara's actions, though misguided, were born of love, not malice. The final threads they are now tied." They returned to the hall where Lady Evelyn waited, her face a mask of gratitude and sorrow. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, "Clara told me what she did. I'm sorry she kept silent, but I understand why. You've given us a chance to move forward." Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, the past cannot be undone, but the future, it is yours to shape. Guard it well." As the motor car arrived to take them to the station, Poirot cast a final glance at Blackthorn Hall. The manor stood resolute, its secrets laid bare, its wounds beginning to heal. "The truth, Hastings," he said softly. "It is a light that reveals both pain and hope. Let us leave this place to its healing." With that, they stepped into the car, the moor fading behind them as they headed for London, leaving Blackthorn Hall to its quiet redemption. Chapter 15. The Departure. The evening of September 6, 1925, settled over Blackthorn Hall with a quiet finality. The moor outside bathed in the soft hues of dusk. The manor, once a crucible of suspicion and
Done it again. You turned chaos into order, found the truth where it seemed impossible. But I confess, I feel for Lady Evelyn and Clara. They've lost so much. Poirot's eyes softened, though his posture remained impeccable. Mon ami, the truth, it is a double-edged sword. It brings justice, oui, but it also lays bare the frailties of those we love. Lady Evelyn and Mademoiselle Clara, they will endure, for they have each other. But come, let us reflect one final time before we depart. The two men stepped onto the gravel drive, where the motor car waited to carry them to the station. The air was crisp, tinged with the scent of heather and damp earth, and the moor stretched endlessly before them, its wild beauty a stark contrast to the ordered world Poirot cherished. He paused, gazing at the horizon, his hands clasped behind his back. "This case, Hastings," he began, his voice low and thoughtful. It was not only about murder, but about the human heart, its greed, its loyalty, its fear. Victor Marwood sought to manipulate with lies about a forged will, and Gerald Thornton killed to protect a deeper secret, one of financial deceit that bound him to Sir Reginald. Clara, in her love for her aunt, hid the truth, believing it would shield her. Each acted from their own truth, yet each was ensnared by it. Hastings nodded, his mind replaying the intricate web of clues, the scuff mark, the displaced inkstand, the smudged windowsill, the untouched brandy glass, the burned note. "It's remarkable, Poirot, how you saw through it all. The locked room, the thread through the keyhole, that was a stroke of genius." Poirot's moustache twitched with a faint smile. "The locked room, it is a challenge but never impossible. The mind of the criminal, it leaves traces, small, yes, but clear to one who looks with method. The thread, the crate in the conservatory, the burned note, these were not accidents but signs of a desperate plan. Thornton believed he could outwit us all, but he forgot that Hercule Poirot sees what others overlook." A soft footfall interrupted them. Lady Evelyn approached, her black dress softened by a shawl of deep blue, Clara at distance, its gabled roofs fading into the twilight. Hastings leaned back, a sense of closure settling over him. "You know, Poirot, I think I'll miss this place, despite everything. There's something about it, the history, the mystery." Poirot shuddered theatrically. "Miss it? No, mon ami. The moor, it is too wild, too untidy for Hercule Poirot. Give me the Order of London, the comfort of my flat, and a cup of tisane properly prepared. That is where I belong." Hastings chuckled, but his thoughts lingered on the case. "Do you ever wonder, Poirot, what drives people to such extremes? Thornton, Victor, even Clara, they all acted out of some desperate need." Poirot's gaze turned to the window, where the last light of day painted the moor in shades of gold and shadow. "The human heart, Hastings, it is a labyrinth of desires and fears. But with logic, with method, we find our way through. And in the end, the truth, it is the only path to peace." As the car rumbled toward the station, Blackthorn Hall vanished behind a curve in the road, its secrets laid to rest. Poirot, his work complete, closed his eyes, a faint smile on his lips, already anticipating the next puzzle that would call upon his little gray cells.